Most people do not ruin their life in one shocking decision. They get warned first. They feel the check in their conscience and explain it away. They see the pattern forming and call it a season. They hear correction and tell themselves the person speaking does not understand. Then one day, the damage looks sudden to everyone else, but it was not sudden. It was rehearsed in private for a long time. That is why this episode matters. Proverbs does not wait until the fall is finished. It speaks while there is still time to turn around. It shows the warning signs before pride becomes destruction, before a neglected heart becomes a polluted stream, before hidden sin becomes a rope, before temptation becomes fire, and before delay becomes punishment. If you only listen after everything collapses, wisdom will sound like a post-mortem. But if you listen now, wisdom can still be a rescue. So do not hear this as a message for the obvious sinner, the person who has already been exposed, or the person whose life is visibly falling apart. Hear it as a test for the quieter places in your own life. Where are you being corrected, but not changing? Where are you drifting, but still calling it manageable? Where are you standing close to the edge, while telling yourself you are not the kind of person who falls? The most dangerous warning is not the one you never heard. It is the one you heard clearly and then learned how to ignore. The book of Proverbs was written so that we might recognize the path before our feet land on it. It does not show us the future. It shows us the pattern. A man ignores a warning. He convinces himself he is the exception. Then he wonders how he arrived at a place he never intended to be. The warnings in Proverbs are not threats. They are maps. They show where the road goes before you travel far enough to discover it by pain. The verse is familiar enough to quote without thinking. The most dangerous truths are the ones you have heard so often that they no longer land with any weight. Proverbs chapter 16 verse 18 says, "Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall." It has become a proverb even among people who do not read the Bible. But familiarity dulls the edge. The word for pride here carries the sense of lifting oneself up beyond measure. It is not confidence. It is not a healthy awareness of your gifts. It is the subtle conviction that the ordinary rules no longer apply to you. The haughty spirit looks down on the small warning. It tells itself that other people fall into those traps. But you are more careful, more experienced, more spiritually mature. It compares itself downward and finds comfort in not being as bad as someone else. The misunderstanding people carry about this verse is that pride means loud arrogance. The soul that is most in danger is usually the one that does not recognize the danger at all. They imagine a boastful man shouting about his own accomplishments. But pride in Proverbs is far quieter than that. It is the quiet, inner calculation that you do not need to examine your heart today. It is the private assumption that your track record speaks for itself. It is the decision to skip the examination because you already know what you will find. Pride is not always loud. Sometimes it is the silence of a man who has stopped listening. The most dangerous pride does not announce itself. It simply settles into the bones like a familiar weight you no longer notice. In daily life, pride shows up in the small refusals. It is possible to go through an entire day making choices that feed pride while believing you are simply living your normal life. You are corrected by a friend and you feel the immediate need to explain yourself rather than receive what they said. You read a passage of scripture and you assume it applies to someone else, never to you. You sit under teaching and you evaluate it instead of receiving it, measuring the preacher instead of measuring yourself against the text. These are not dramatic sins. They are the soil in which destruction grows. The proud heart does not announce itself. It simply stops bending. A man can preach against pride on Sunday morning and practice it by Sunday afternoon without noticing the contradiction. The heart is that skilled at hiding itself from its own owner. When you notice yourself defending a habit you already know is wrong, that is the haughty spirit at work. That moment of irritation is itself the warning. The pride announces its presence by its reaction to being exposed. When you feel irritation at the suggestion that you might need to change, that is pride preparing the ground for a fall. When you compare yourself to people who are worse than you instead of to Christ, that is pride insulating itself from correction. The warning is not that pride will make you feel bad. The warning is that pride will bring destruction, not might. The verse does not say pride might lead to destruction. It says pride goes before destruction. The connection is as certain as the connection between sowing and reaping. A man who plants corn does not wonder whether corn will grow. He knows. And a man who nurtures pride in his heart should not wonder whether destruction will follow. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 says, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." In the book of Proverbs, the heart is not merely the seat of emotion, it is the command center of the whole person. It is where your affections, your desires, your reasoning, and your will all converge. Every action you take begins as emotion in the heart before it becomes emotion in the body. To keep the heart with all diligence means to guard it as a fortress. It means posting watchmen at the gates and not allowing anything through without examination. The word diligence implies effort that does not stop. It is not a single decision made years ago. It is a daily posture of attention, renewed every morning. The common misunderstanding is that keeping the heart means suppressing dangerous feelings. You can only pretend a desire is not there, and that pretense is the opposite of keeping. People think they are guarding their heart when they refuse to acknowledge what they actually want. They mistake denial for discipline. But the verse is not telling you to hide your desires from yourself. It is telling you to watch them. A suppressed desire does not disappear. It goes underground and works in the dark, growing roots where you cannot see them. The man who tells himself he does not struggle with a particular sin is often the man most vulnerable to it. Keeping the heart requires honesty before it requires discipline. You cannot guard what you refuse to see. The practical application is uncomfortable because it requires time and attention. The honest man looks at his desires and asks whether they are leading him toward God or away from him. Very few Christians are destroyed by a sudden temptation that appears without warning. Most are destroyed by a heart. They stopped watching. A heart that drifted slowly over years. A heart that entertained small compromises and then learned to justify them. The way to keep the heart is to give it regular attention. To ask yourself what you are actually craving when you are alone with your thoughts. To name the thing you want rather than pretending you do not want it. To bring those desires into the light of Scripture instead of letting them operate in the shadows where they grow stronger. Neglect of the heart is the most common form of spiritual carelessness. A heart that is not actively being kept is a heart that is being lost inch by inch. You do not need to commit a gross sin to abandon the guarding of your heart. You only need to stop paying attention. The issues of life flow from the heart. If the spring is poisoned, the whole stream is poisoned. But we often treat the symptoms downstream while the source remains untouched. We try to fix behavior without examining desire. We try to stop the leak without checking the condition of the vessel. That is why the Proverbs command diligence instead of occasional inspection. The heart does not remain neutral. It is either being kept or it is drifting. There is no third option. Proverbs chapter 5 verses 21 through 23 says, "For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he pondereth all his goings." The doctrine of God's omniscience is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to free you from the exhausting work of pretending. His own iniquities shall take the wicked himself, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sins. He shall die without instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. These verses appear in a chapter about the dangers of adultery, but the principle reaches far beyond that single sin. The principle is that nothing is hidden from God, not your private thoughts, not the browsing history that no one else will ever see, not the conversation you had in a room with the door closed, not the financial transaction you structured just slightly outside the lines, not the grudge you nurse in the silence of your own mind. Every single going is pondered, weighed, and fully known. The misunderstanding here is that hidden sin remains hidden. Sin is never as private as we imagine it to be. It is observed by the one who matters most, and it always leaves a mark on the one who commits it. People imagine that if no human discovered the sin has no consequences. They think of God as a distant observer who does not act on what he sees. But the text says that the wicked are taken by their own iniquities. They are held with the cords of their own sins. The metaphor is chilling. The same sin you committed for pleasure becomes the rope that binds you. You do not need an external prosecutor. Your own sin testifies against you, and it drags you where you do not want to go. The cords are woven one strand at a time, a small compromise here, a small excuse there, a justification offered to your own conscience. And before you recognize what is happening, you are tied. The everyday application is that you should treat your secret life with the same seriousness you treat your public life. The secret life is the real life. The public life is often a performance. What you do when no one is watching is who you actually are. Perhaps with more seriousness, because the secret life shapes the public life far more than the reverse. A man who lies in small matters when no one is watching will eventually lie in large matters when everyone is watching. A woman who harbors bitterness in private will eventually express that bitterness in ways she cannot control. The cords of sin tighten slowly. You do not feel them on the first twist, but they are there, and each indulgence adds another strand. The man who thinks he can sin in secret and walk away unchanged is deceiving himself. The sin changes him whether anyone finds out or not. This is not a message of despair. The cords of sin are real, but they are not unbreakable when you bring them to the light while they are still fresh. It is a call to honesty. The one who sees all your goings is also the one who invites you to confession. There is no sin that must remain hidden, because there is no sin that God has not already seen. The only question is whether you will bring it into the light yourself, or wait until the cords tighten beyond your strength to loosen them. The man who confesses his sin cuts the cords while they are still loose. The man who hides his sin gives them time to become chains, and chains are much harder to break than cords. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 27 through 28 asks, "Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned?" The implied answer in both cases is no. The question expects the answer that any reasonable person already knows. Fire burns. Coals are hot. Proximity to destruction does not produce safety. It produces destruction. The context is again adultery, but the principle is about the nature of temptation itself. There is a point of no return that arrives before you commit the act. It arrives the moment you decide to get close. The decision to put yourself in the path of temptation is itself a decision that a wise man would not make. The misunderstanding people bring to these verses is that they overestimate their ability to resist. Every person who fell into serious sin began exactly where you are now, believing they would never be the one to fall. We are all worse judges of our own strength than we realize, and the consequences of that miscalculation are paid in ways we cannot reverse. They imagine that temptation only becomes dangerous at the moment of the act itself. But the fire burns long before that. It burns when you allow yourself to look. It burns when you permit the thought to linger. It burns when you begin to argue with yourself about whether it is really that dangerous. By the time you are standing at the edge, your clothes are already burning. The destruction did not begin with the final step. It began with the first glance. It began with the conversation you should have ended. It began with the door you left open. The practical application is unmistakable. The question is not whether you can handle the fire. The question is why you would want to try. Do not test your resistance against temptation. Test your distance from it. The wise man does not ask how close he can get without sinning. He asks how far he can stay away. This applies to relationships that you know are spiritually unhealthy. It applies to entertainment that feeds desires you are trying to kill. It applies to the conversations that always seem to pull you toward compromise. It applies to the financial arrangements that require you to bend your integrity just a little. It applies to the private browsing sessions you tell yourself are harmless. If you carry fire in your bosom, you will be burned. No amount of spiritual discipline changes the nature of fire. The only safe approach to fire is to keep your distance. Proverbs chapter 22 verse 3 says, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." The ability to see danger coming is a gift, but it only helps if you act on what you see. The word for prudent carries the sense of being shrewd or sensible. It is not a spiritual term. It is the kind of word you would use to describe a man who sees a storm coming and brings his harvest in before the rain destroys it. The prudent man is not a prophet. He does not know exactly what will happen, but he recognizes danger when he sees it, and he acts accordingly. He does not wait for certainty. He waits long enough to recognize the pattern, and then he moves. The misunderstanding here is that the simple are merely naive or uneducated. The simple are not ignorant. They are unwilling. They see the same evidence and refuse to draw the necessary conclusion. But the word simple in Proverbs describes someone who is open to folly. The simple person sees the same warning the prudent person sees. They both notice the storm clouds. The difference is what they do with what they see. The simple person assumes the storm will pass around him. He assumes his luck will hold. He assumes he is the exception. The prudent person assumes nothing. He sees the danger, he does not argue with it, and he removes himself from its path. The simple person does not lack intelligence. He lacks the will to act on what he knows. The everyday application is painful because it forces you to admit that you already know what you should do. The pain of admitting what you already know is temporary. The pain of ignoring it until destruction comes is permanent. You have seen the pattern before. You have watched other people walk exactly this road and arrive exactly where you do not want to be. The warning is not hidden from you. The question is whether you will act on it or pass on. The simple pass on. They continue in the same direction. They tell themselves that this time will be different. They convince themselves that their situation is unique, and then they are punished. Not because God sent a special judgment against them, because the road they chose leads where roads like that always lead. The punishment is built into the path itself. There is a difference between spiritual discernment and willful ignorance. You cannot plead ignorance when the proverb has made the pattern plain. Discernment sees the warning and adjusts direction. Willful ignorance sees the warning and convinces itself the warning does not apply. You cannot claim you did not know. The warning was in front of you. Do it before delay becomes another excuse. The proverb was written for you. The only honest question is whether you will hide yourself or pass on. Hiding yourself is not running away in fear. It is stepping out of the path of destruction because you have the sense to recognize it for what it is. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 12 repeats this warning. The same warning reappears later in the book, this time in a section about the uncertainties of tomorrow. The Spirit who inspired the Proverbs knew that we need to hear the same warning more than once. In this context, the prudent man again sees the evil and hides himself, while the simple pass on and are punished. The repetition is intentional. Proverbs uses repetition to mark what is essential. When you hear the same instruction twice, you should understand that your natural inclination is to ignore it the first time. This warning is placed right where you are most tempted to rely on your own plans and your own sense of timing. The misunderstanding about this repeated proverb is that it only applies to obvious physical dangers. The surface meaning is obvious, but the deep meaning is what saves you, because the most destructive evils do not announce themselves as evil. The evil that is hardest to see is the evil that does not look like evil at first. People imagine the prudent man is someone who locks his doors and buys insurance. Those things are fine, but the proverb operates on a deeper level than property protection. The evil that the prudent foresee is not just the burglar in the night. It is the moral collapse that follows a series of small compromises. It is the broken marriage that no one saw coming, but that everyone could have predicted if they had been honest about the warning signs. It is the spiritual numbness that creeps in when you stop feeding your soul. It is the gradual drift away from the faith that happens so slowly. You do not notice it until you are far from shore. The application here is to ask yourself what you see coming that you are not willing to name. The most dangerous lie you can tell is the lie you tell yourself about where your current path is leading. Every person has an area of life where they know the direction they are heading. They feel the drift. They sense the cooling of their affections. They notice the distance growing between where they are and where they used to be. The prudent man names what he sees. The simple man looks away. The simple man changes the subject. The simple man makes excuses and distractions. But the prudent man looks at the drift and calls it what it is before it carries him too far to swim back. To hide yourself is not an act of cowardice. It is the opposite of cowardice, because it requires admitting that you are not strong enough to stand in the path of danger. It is an act of wisdom. It means arranging your life so that the path of least resistance is the path of obedience. It means putting boundaries in place before the temptation arrives, not after. It means having conversations now that will be more difficult to have later. It means saying no to opportunities that look good but will pull you in the wrong direction. The time to hide yourself is not when the enemy is at the gate. The time to hide yourself is when you first see the dust on the horizon. The wise man does not wait until the danger is upon him. He moves while there is still time to move. He that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. The repetition of reproof is itself a sign of mercy, and each ignored warning brings the destruction closer. Each warning you ignore today makes tomorrow's warning easier to ignore. The image is of an ox that resists the yoke by stiffening its neck. The more the farmer tries to guide it, the more the animal refuses to yield. But this proverb is not about animals. It is about the human response to repeated correction. A man is warned. He ignores the warning. He is warned again. He explains it away. He is warned a third time. He begins to resent the person giving the warning. He questions their motives. He finds reasons to dismiss their concern. And then something happens, and there is no more time. The destruction arrives, and there is no remedy, because the time for remedy was while the warnings were still coming. The common misunderstanding of this verse is that it refers to a single dramatic act of judgment sent directly from heaven. The judgment in Proverbs is rarely a lightning bolt from heaven. It is the slow, steady consequence of a life oriented away from wisdom. But the destruction here is the natural consequence of a prolonged pattern of refusal. When you harden your neck to correction, you are not just rejecting the advice. You are training yourself to become unreachable. Each refusal makes the next refusal easier. Each excuse makes the next excuse more convincing. Each resentment toward the person who warned you makes you less likely to listen the next time someone tries. Eventually, you reach a place where correction no longer registers. That is the destruction. It is not always a lightning bolt. It is the slow death of a conscience that no longer responds to anything. The pastoral application is urgent, but not panicked. The fact that you can still feel the warning means the hardening has not yet become complete. If you have been warned multiple times about the same thing, you must consider whether your neck is hardening. The repeated warning is a mercy. It means God has not given up on you yet, but the mercy has an expiration date that you do not know. The destruction comes suddenly, not because it happens without warning, but because when it arrives, the time for warning has passed. Today is the day to bend the neck, while bending is still possible. Tomorrow is not promised, and the proverb offers no guarantee of another opportunity. If you are reading this, and you have been warned about the same thing more than once, you are still being given time. Use it while you have it. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. This verse alone should drive every thinking person to humility about their own judgment. This verse exposes the deepest problem beneath all the other warnings. It is not that we choose what we know is wrong. It is that we genuinely believe we are choosing what is right, and we are mistaken. The way seems right. It seems reasonable. It seems justified given the circumstances, and that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. If the wrong path looked obviously wrong, very few people would take it. The deceptive path is the one that looks like wisdom while leading to destruction. The misunderstanding about this verse is that people take the wrong path because they lack information or because their intentions are bad. The most dangerous errors are the ones that feel right to the person committing them. But the verse says, the way seems right to the man walking it. He has all the information he needs. He is not a villain. He is a sincere person who is sincerely wrong. The heart is capable of justifying almost anything. It can reframe disobedience as wisdom. It can rename fear as prudence. It can relabel selfishness as self-care. It can dress up stubbornness as conviction. It can call lust love and call greed ambition. The way seems right because the heart has become skilled at deception, and the person being deceived most effectively is the one who lives inside that heart. The application is to develop a healthy suspicion of your own reasoning. A healthy suspicion is not paranoia. It is the humility to admit that your heart is capable of deceiving you, and often has. Your heart will always find reasons to do what it wants. That is why you need outside counsel, outside wisdom, and outside accountability. When you find yourself arguing for a course of action that isolates you from godly counsel, that is a warning. When you notice that your interpretation of Scripture always seems to accommodate what you already want to do, that is a warning. When the people who know you best express concern and you feel the need to defend your decision rather than examine it, that is a warning. When you are the only person you know who sees your situation the way you do, that is a warning. When you are spending more energy justifying a course of action than examining it, that is a warning. The way may seem right to you, but the end of that way is death. You need more than your own judgment. You need the perspective of the Proverbs and the people who love you enough to speak the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. The opening chapter of Proverbs gives a haunting image of wisdom calling out to those who will not listen. Wisdom does not hide itself. It is we who hide from wisdom. The call is still sounding. The only question that matters is whether you will answer it while you still can. Because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand and no man regarded. Wisdom is not hidden. It is not a secret knowledge reserved for the spiritually elite. It is not something you have to climb a mountain to find. Wisdom stands in the streets. Wisdom cries out in the public squares. Wisdom speaks through the ordinary circumstances of daily life and through the people God places around you. The problem is not that wisdom is silent. The problem is that the simple have trained themselves not to hear. The misunderstanding is that wisdom is something you can pursue whenever you are ready. There is always a reason to delay obedience, and every reason to delay is a trap dressed as prudence. People imagine they will get serious about their spiritual life later. They think they will repent after one more indulgence. They tell themselves that the warning is for someone else today, and tomorrow they will pay attention. But the opening chapter of Proverbs warns that the call has a shelf life. Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. There comes a moment when the window closes, not because God is cruel or vindictive, but because persistent refusal to respond eventually makes response impossible. The muscle of obedience atrophies when it is never used. The everyday application is to respond now to what you already know. The moment you hear the warning is the moment to act, because the window between hearing and hardening is narrower than you think. You do not need more information. You do not need a dramatic sign from heaven. You need to do the thing you have been putting off. You need to have the conversation you have been avoiding. You need to repent of the sin you have been minimizing. You need to say no to the opportunity you know you should refuse. You need to make the phone call, send the message, close the tab, end the relationship, or take whatever step you have been postponing out of fear or comfort. Wisdom is calling right now. The only question is whether you will answer while the call is still sounding. There is a difference between knowing a thing is true and having that truth so rooted in you that it changes how you walk. The Proverbs press toward the second kind of knowing. They are not content to inform you. They aim to form you. And formation requires more than a single hearing. It requires returning to the same warnings until they become instinct. The man who has been warned about pride 100 times and still bristles at correction has not yet learned what the warning is trying to teach him. The warning must travel from the page into the bones, and that journey takes time and honesty and the willingness to be wrong about yourself. The verses in Proverbs about the heart are not suggestions for improvement. They are descriptions of how things actually work. A man does not drift into wisdom the same way he drifts into folly. Folly is the natural current of the fallen heart. Wisdom is against the current. It requires effort, attention, and the conscious decision to row against the flow. This is why Proverbs speaks of keeping the heart with all diligence. Diligence is the word you use for something that will not happen on its own. If you are not actively keeping your heart, you are not keeping it at all. Neutrality is a myth. The heart that is not being guarded is being lost. The cord that binds a man is woven slowly, but it is woven from choices he made while fully awake. No one wakes up one morning and discovers they have become a different person. They became that person through 1,000 small decisions they told themselves did not matter. The decision to scroll past the conviction. The decision to silence the voice of conscience. The decision to avoid the person who would tell them the truth. Each decision was small. Each decision seemed reasonable at the time. But the cords are strong because there are many, not because any single strand is thick. The man who wants to avoid being bound must pay attention to the individual strands while they are still weak enough to break. The question of proximity is where most people make their fatal error. They believe they can stand near the fire without being burned because they have stood near it before and survived. They mistake past survival for future safety. But the fire does not change its nature because you have been lucky. The man who puts his hand near the flame 100 times without being burned has not proven that the flame is safe. He has proven only that he has not yet touched it. The Proverbs do not ask whether you have fallen yet. They ask whether you are standing where a fall is possible. If the answer is yes, the warning is already speaking to you. The prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. But hiding requires knowing what evil looks like when it is still in the distance. Many people fail to hide because they do not recognize the shape of what is coming. They see the dust on the horizon and they mistake it for an ordinary cloud. They feel the shift in the air and they tell themselves it is just weather. The Proverbs exist to train your eye to recognize the shape of destruction while it is still far enough away to avoid. The prudent man has been trained by these verses. He has learned to recognize the patterns that precede a fall, and because he recognizes them, he can act before the danger arrives. There is a particular danger in the sin that feels small. The sin that does not alarm your conscience because it seems too minor to matter. A sharp word spoken to someone you love. A small exaggeration in a story that makes you look better. A few minutes of entertainment that feeds a desire you know you should starve. These feel too small to guard against. But the Proverbs teach that small sins are the most dangerous because they are the ones you let through the gate. The large sin cannot enter without being challenged. The small sin walks through while the guard is looking the other way. And once inside, it does not remain small. It grows. It draws company. It makes itself at home. The small sin you tolerate today is the large sin that destroys you tomorrow. The phrase "without remedy" appears in Proverbs with a weight that should stop every reader cold. There is a point beyond which correction no longer helps. Not because God stops being merciful, but because the one being corrected has stopped being reachable. The neck has hardened. The heart has calloused over. The voice of wisdom still speaks, but the ears no longer register the sound. This is the most terrifying possibility in the book of Proverbs, not because it describes God's anger, but because it describes what a person can do to themselves through persistent refusal. The remedy is available while the neck is still flexible. The time to bend is while bending is still possible. No one knows when the window closes, and that uncertainty is itself a mercy meant to drive you to action now rather than later. The warnings about the way that seems right are warnings about the limits of your own perception. The heart does not announce its deceptions. It does not flash a warning light when it is leading you astray. The way seems right, all the way to the end. The man walking it does not feel like he is walking toward death. He feels like he is walking toward life. He feels reasonable. He feels justified. He feels more certain than he has ever felt. And that certainty is itself the evidence that he needs outside counsel. The man who is absolutely certain he is right and cannot imagine another perspective is the man most likely to be walking the way that leads to death. Certainty is not the same as truth. The Proverbs invite you to hold your convictions with enough humility to let them be tested. The opening of Proverbs presents wisdom as a woman crying out in the streets. She is not hidden. She is not obscure. She is not reserved for the intellectually gifted or the spiritually advanced. She stands where everyone can hear her. The fact that you are reading these words right now is evidence that wisdom is still calling to you. But the same passage warns that the call will not continue forever. There is a day when wisdom stops calling and begins to laugh at the calamity of those who refused her. That laughter is not cruelty. It is the natural result of a call that was extended and rejected so many times that the caller finally falls silent. The silence of wisdom is the most frightening silence in the universe. Do not wait until you hear it. The window between hearing and hardening is narrower than most people realize. A warning has power at the moment it is delivered. That power does not last indefinitely. It must be acted upon while the heat of conviction is still warm. This is why the Proverbs urge immediate response. Delay is not neutral. Delay is the enemy of obedience. Every moment you wait to act on what you know gives your heart time to construct reasons why action is unnecessary. The heart is extraordinarily creative when it wants to avoid obedience. It will generate objections you never considered. It will find theological justifications for inaction. It will convince you that waiting is actually wisdom. But the Proverbs cut through that reasoning. When wisdom calls, the time to answer is now. The man who has been reproved multiple times about the same thing must ask himself a hard question. Why has the warning not taken root? It is possible that he has not understood it. It is possible that he has not taken it seriously. But it is also possible that he has begun to harden his neck without realizing it. The repeated reproof is itself a test. The way you respond to correction reveals the condition of your heart. If you feel irritation when the same warnings come again, you are feeling the early stages of hardening. If you find yourself explaining why your situation is different, you are feeling the early stages of hardening. The healthy response to repeated correction is not defensiveness. It is gratitude that God has not given up on you and a renewed determination to cooperate with what the warning is trying to accomplish. The Proverbs do not leave you in despair over your own weakness. They give you the warnings so that you can act while action still matters. The man who knows his own tendency toward pride can guard against it. The man who knows his heart will drift if neglected can keep it with diligence. The man who knows his secret sins will bind him can bring them to light before the cords tighten. The man who knows the fire will burn can stay at a safe distance. The man who knows he is prone to deceive himself can submit his judgments to outside counsel. The man who knows the window will close can answer the call today. Knowledge of the danger is not meant to paralyze you. It is meant to free you to act with wisdom while there is still time. The warnings of Proverbs are structured like a map. A map does not create the terrain. It simply shows you what is already there. The valleys and the cliffs and the safe paths exist whether you have a map or not. But without the map, you discover the cliff by falling off it. With the map, you see it from a distance and choose another route. Every proverb in this book is a landmark on the map of human experience. The pride that leads to destruction, the heart that must be kept, the secret sin that binds, the fire that burns, the evil that can be foreseen, the neck that hardens, the way that seems right. These are not abstract theological concepts. They are features of the moral landscape that every human being travels through. The map is in your hands. The question is whether you will consult it before you take the next step. The mercy of the warning is that it arrives before the destruction. If the warning arrived after the fall, it would be useless. But it comes while you can still change direction. It comes while the fire is still in the distance. It comes while the cords are still loose. It comes while the neck can still bend. The timing of the warning is itself evidence of God's patience. He does not wait until you are past the point of return to speak. He speaks early. He speaks often. He speaks through repetition. And he waits to see whether you will listen. The fact that you are hearing this for the first time or for the 100th time is not an accident. It is the continuing mercy of a God who has not yet closed the window. The storm will come. That is not a prophecy. It is a certainty of life in a fallen world. The question is not whether the storm will arrive. The question is whether what you have built will stand when it does. The man who is built on the rock of wisdom does not escape the storm. He endures it. His house is shaken, but it does not fall. The difference between his house and the house built on sand is not the storm. It is the foundation. The warnings of Proverbs are the foundation materials. They are laid one at a time, through attention and obedience and the willingness to be taught. Every time you respond to a warning, you lay another stone. Every time you ignore one, you weaken the structure. The storm will test what you have built. Build wisely while the sun is still shining, because the storm is not a possibility. It is a promise. There is also a warning in the moment after you notice danger, but before you decide what to do with it. Many people think the decisive moment is the obvious crisis, but Proverbs teaches that the decisive moment usually comes earlier. It comes when the heart first senses the warning. It comes when the conscience first tightens. It comes when a trusted person first raises a concern. That moment may look small from the outside, but spiritually it is weighty. The prudent man does not despise that small moment. He treats it as mercy. He understands that a warning heard early is easier to obey than a warning heard late. The neglected heart rarely feels neglected at first. It often feels busy, tired, justified, or distracted. A man may tell himself that he is simply under pressure, that he will return to prayer when life settles down, that he will examine his motives after the urgent work is finished. But Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 does not say keep thy heart when life becomes convenient. It says keep thy heart with all diligence. Diligence is needed precisely because life will not make room for it on its own. The heart must be guarded in ordinary weeks, not only in dramatic seasons. Hidden sin also teaches a person to divide himself. He learns to speak one way in public and think another way in private. He learns to manage impressions instead of seeking repentance. Proverbs chapter 5, verses 21 through 23 cuts through that division by reminding us that the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord. The hidden room is not hidden from God. The private habit is not private before Him. This is not meant to crush the repentant person. It is meant to end the exhausting performance. You do not have to keep pretending before the one who already sees. The fire warning is especially practical because it refuses sentimental language about temptation. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 27 and 28 does not ask whether the man has good intentions while carrying fire. It asks whether fire burns. A person may have sincere intentions and still be foolish with proximity. He may say, the relationship is harmless, the habit is controlled, the entertainment is manageable, the conversation is innocent. But wisdom asks a better question. What does this closeness produce in the heart? If it heats desires that should be cooled, if it weakens convictions that should be strengthened, if it makes obedience feel burdensome, then the fire is already doing its work. The prudent man in Proverbs chapter 22 verse 3 does not need a complete map of the future before he acts. He only needs enough light to recognize danger. This matters because many people delay obedience by demanding certainty. They say they are waiting until they know what will happen. But wisdom rarely gives that kind of certainty. Wisdom gives enough warning to take the next faithful step. You may not know every consequence of staying on the path you are on, but you may know enough to leave it. You may not know exactly how a compromise will unfold, but you may know enough to stop feeding it. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 12 repeats the warning because we often need repetition more than novelty. The spiritual life is not sustained by constantly discovering new truths while ignoring old ones. It is sustained by returning to what God has already made clear. The simple pass on because they are always looking for a different explanation, a softer warning, or a later deadline. The prudent man does not need the warning to be entertaining. He needs it to be true. Once he sees that it is true, he acts. The way that seems right can be especially persuasive when it is wrapped in religious language. A person can call stubbornness conviction, call avoidance peace, call fear discernment, and call self-protection wisdom. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 12 warns us that the path may seem right while still ending in death. That means sincerity is not enough. Strong feeling is not enough. A clean explanation is not enough. The question is whether the way is actually wise before God. If the path requires secrecy, resentment, isolation, or the steady silencing of correction, then it may seem right while leading somewhere deadly. So, the warning before life falls apart is often quieter than we expect. It may be a verse that will not leave your mind. It may be a conversation you keep replaying because you know there was truth in it. It may be the uneasiness you feel after defending yourself too quickly. It may be the repeated evidence that a habit is no longer small. Do not despise that quiet warning because it lacks drama. Many of God's mercies arrive quietly. The question is whether you will honor the warning while it is still quiet, or wait until it becomes consequence. This is why the wise response is not dramatic, self-condemnation, but prompt obedience. When the warning is clear, take the next faithful step while it is still simple. Confess what needs confession. End what needs ending. Guard what needs guarding. The mercy is that wisdom has spoken before the collapse, and that means there is still a path of obedience in front of you. Before we close, stay for one more sober thought. A warning is not only about avoiding disaster. It is also about learning to love the path that keeps you near wisdom. If you only hear Proverbs as a list of dangers, you may obey for a moment and then return to the same road when fear fades. But if you begin to see the warning as mercy, obedience becomes less like panic and more like trust. The guarded heart is not a smaller heart. It is a freer heart. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 does not call you to live suspicious of every feeling, but to bring every feeling under wise attention. You are not guarding your heart because every desire is equally dangerous. You are guarding it because the heart is precious, and precious things are not left open to every passerby. The hidden sin that seems manageable today becomes heavier tomorrow. Proverbs chapter 5 reminds us that the Lord sees the way before the cords become visible to other people. That means confession is not the beginning of being seen. It is the beginning of telling the truth about what God already sees. There is relief in that. You do not have to wait until the secret becomes public before you walk into the light. The fire you refuse to carry may feel like loss at first. You may miss the conversation, the habit, the entertainment, or the private indulgence. But Proverbs chapter 6 teaches that not every loss is harm. Sometimes losing access to the fire is the way your life is spared. Wisdom does not ask you to prove strength by staying close. Wisdom invites you to prove humility by stepping back. The prudent person may look overly cautious to the simple person. He may be mocked for leaving early, setting boundaries, confessing quickly, or refusing what others treat lightly. But Proverbs chapter 22 verse 3 and Proverbs chapter 27 verse 12 both honor the person who sees danger and hides himself. The goal is not to look brave in front of fools. The goal is to remain faithful before God. And if the way still seems right to you, slow down before you defend it. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 12 is not written for someone else first. It is written for the moment when your own reasoning feels airtight. Ask whether this path can survive scripture, prayer, wise counsel, and honest examination. If it cannot survive those things, then it is not wisdom, no matter how right it seems in the privacy of your own mind. So receive the warning as a gift, not as noise, not as shame, not as an interruption to the life you wanted. Receive it as a lamp placed before your next step. The warning before life falls apart is mercy arriving early. When mercy arrives early, do not send it away. Listen, turn, and walk the wiser road while the road is still open. Let us trace the pattern one more time. The pattern is consistent across every section of this book because human nature does not change, and neither does the wisdom that addresses it. Pride goes before destruction, so examine your heart for the quiet assumption that you are the exception. Keep your heart with all diligence, because the issues of life flow from it, and a neglected heart always drifts. Remember that your ways are before the Lord, and hidden sin does not remain hidden forever. Do not carry fire in your bosom, because the nature of fire does not change when you want it to. Be prudent and see the evil before it arrives, and then hide yourself, while hiding is still effective. Do not harden your neck against repeated correction, because destruction comes suddenly and without remedy. Recognize that the way which seems right to you may still lead to death. And when wisdom calls, answer today, because tomorrow is not guaranteed to come. Every warning in this book is an invitation to turn before it is too late. None of these warnings are given to terrify you. The warning is administered not to wound but to heal, and the time to receive it is while it is still being offered. They are given to awaken you. The Proverbs do not describe an angry God waiting to punish the smallest misstep. They describe a loving Father who has placed signs along the road so that you do not have to learn everything the hard way. The warning is itself a mercy. It means you still have time. It means the pattern has been exposed and you can choose a different path. The question is not whether the warning is clear. The question is whether you will listen while there is still time to act. No hype, no dramatic promises, no guarantees of what your life will look like if you follow this counsel. The Proverbs do not promise you a trouble-free life. They promise you a wise life, and a wise life has its own difficulties. But the wise man and the foolish man face the same storms. The difference is that the wise man built his house on rock, not because the rock prevented the storm, but because the rock held when the storm came. The warnings in Proverbs are that rock. They are the solid ground you stand on before the rain begins to fall. Build on them while the sun is still shining. The storm is not a punishment. It is a test of what you have already built. And the time to build is now.